This is the first in what's going to be a series of webinars that are on the theme of strategic adaptation that we're undertaking the Climate Majority Project this year. If you're not yet familiar with the idea of strategic adaptation, this is the idea that it is now essential that we take climate adaptation seriously. There's no escaping that because we're deep into the age of consequences. We're deep into the age of deleterious climate impacts. And the idea of strategic adaptation is not to do that climate adaptation in a reactive, defensive way, but to do it in a holistic, transformative way, looking to change things upstream and not just at the point of impact. So, for example, thinking about upland water management and not just about adding new hard flood defenses where homes are actually flooding. And strategic adaptation synergizes with decarbonisation rather than being opposed to it. We think it's a game changer. You might already have seen the article I wrote about it in The Guardian earlier this year. We also talked about it, Caroline Lucas and I, in our New Statesman article recently. Perhaps someone could put the links to those in the chat. And as Liam mentioned, it's going to be obviously the central theme in the first of our OSF funded reports, which is on strategic adaptation for emergency resilience, which abbreviates, of course, to SAFER, which is the term that we're using in relation to this webinar and this series of webinars. So that's kind of why we're here. We're really excited that this evening we're cooperating with our wonderful incubatee MP Watch. And now Jessica is going to kind of get the ball rolling, Jessica Townsend, the founder of MP Watch, by saying a little bit about MP Watch and yeah, formally welcoming people to the space here. Jessica.
Yes, thank you so much for doing this. This is the first time that we've done a kind of formal collaboration in this way. Because Climate Majority Project helped MP Watch when we were a new project with a little bit of funding, but much more importantly, with mentorship. We have collaborated in many other ways, and I know the people here, and I'm grateful for their help and wisdom in the past as MP Watch has grown. Now, we started off because a short history is Rupert and I were both on in a court case where we had targeted Tufton Street because of climate denialism. After that, I was kind of furious to realize that Steve Baker, who had been the person in charge of Brexit, had joined the Global Warming Policy Foundation. And so we decided to work on the ground in Wickham with local constituents. I'm not sure if Jem is here. I think she intended to be, to counter what he was doing. But then other groups wanted to start up to keep an eye on their MP and to about climate and nature. And at the last election, a whole swathe of climate deniers were lost. And we have done a pivot to making allies with MPs across parties on climate and nature in order to grow understanding of the climate emergency, which still is poor in Parliament, and to build up a network where eventually, when political opportunities come, like maybe the prospect of getting a CAM bill in at some point, it would not be right now with this massive Labour majority, that we take action. One quite exciting thing is that I'm in touch with some tactical voting folk, and they're looking to maybe give Labour a bloody nose at some point in a by-election as a way of saying you're not really doing what we want you to do. And we tactically voted you in, we can tactically vote you out. Now, what the alternative would be is, moot. Would it be Lib Dem Pact with lots of Greens? Obviously, with first past the post, you're kind of you're pushing it anyway. So that's what that's what MP Watch does within the Climate Majority Project umbrella. Because we've got lots of grassroots groups, we're really interested in the resilience project and really interested in how our folks on the ground can start working in order to shore up their communities. So welcome to MP Watch Folk, welcome to the Climate Majority Wider Gang, and I'm very excited to hear how this goes.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Jessica. Okay, let's plunge in. So the first of our speakers that we're going to go to is Barry. It's a real pleasure to have Barry with us, Barry James of Green Streets. Barry is someone who's done all sorts of inspirational and high impact stuff, and now he's trying to take that kind of, well, I think part of it is business acumen, really, isn't it, Barry? And apply it to the business of trying to get climate action to happen meaningfully on a local basis in a way that produces a lot more resilience than in most cases we currently have. And he's here to tell us something about that. Barry, over to you.
Thank you, Rupert, and first of all, thank you to Jessica and to Rupert for making this happen and for the invite, I also to Anne Pettifor for the inspiration, and Dan, when he arrives, I'll explain that a little bit more then. So what I'm interested in and have been for the last couple of decades really is systemic change. So the things that get me really interested and excited is things that we can, change the way that things are working. And I've got a few slides. I'll whiz through them all very quickly. Stop me if you've got questions or whatever, by all means. But that's kind of my history over the last couple of decades or more. Starting with things with working with the NHS, working with Parliament over fintech and enabling innovation through that. I'll talk a bit about that. But now my focus is firmly on how we've got all these great technologies that could be making a huge difference. They really should be rolling out of their own accord and making a huge impact. They're not. So there's a kind of sequence over the last 5 years I've been working on this, looking humane economics was to look at how come we can't change direction. That's ongoing. We're not talking about that today. Humane energy started off looking around the world at the technologies, when they'd be ready to be adopted. Long story short, they are and have been for a long time, but there's friction and barriers that need to be removed. And really, Green Streets started with a question of how can we remove the barriers? How can we systemically accelerate the decarbonisation of homes, which are responsible for roughly 40% of our carbon output, as quickly as possible, and move on from there. So with your permission, I'll just whiz through some
Yeah, go for it, Barry.
Yeah. So let me know when that's visible for you.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So I'll also talk about Deep Impact 2 and explain what that's about. Because it builds on Deep Impact 1. What the opportunity that is now viscerally there is to create more routes, new routes to real zero, even beyond net zero. And as I say, thank you, Anne, for the inspiration. Every street should be solar, that inspired Daniel Edelstyn and co and us as well. Every street should be a power station. So our why is we've got a climate emergency. We all know that. We've also got a cost of living crisis, which makes it difficult to get things adopted. And we've got a path to net zero that's failing us all. So we need more and better paths to and beyond net zero. Waiting for the cavalry didn't work. Trying to change minds is difficult. Not that we should stop, but you know, but what if we could circumvent the gridlock? You know, it's 10 years to get a new connection to the grid. Building on the grid is very expensive and very slow. What if we could circumvent that and do so while supporting the grid to decarbonize and transform instead of waiting? What if we could empower hundreds of projects, in fact, thousands of projects in hundreds of areas, with new clean energy projects? And what if we could make solar self-funding, or very nearly self-funding in some cases, just for starters? And what could make this popular? Well, what if it could return hundreds of millions of pounds that currently exit the area and exit the country within those local areas, within the context, as we now know, of devolution by default, which is the government's push and policy. And I think we can create around 300 new paths to net zero that are not blocked by those things, and actually can have a real impetus behind them because of, not despite of the economic effect, but because of it. And we can do it by building the things that really matter: the resilience, greater independence, and building community as well. So we can, because the facts have changed. The facts of our ability to capture energy rather than have to generate it is a massive change that has not been factored in yet, and the thinking hasn't. All of the experts are all schooled in a paradigm of centralized energy and distribution. And the technology we now have, the green technology, is by its nature local and distributed. And the implications of that are huge. One of my favorite quotes, by the way, and this applies to Safer as well, fantastic. I really love it, having had time to get up to speed, Rupert and everyone, with Safer, as it's doing exactly this, isn't it? It's creating a new model to help making the existing one obsolete. A little bit of background: this is a part of my trajectory. It's not our first rodeo. We managed to create tools to create systemic change on a number of occasions before. Deep Impact 1 was one of them. Westminster Forum was another. This is relating to our hubs model for funding hubs, and Green Street is down here. And this was Deep Impact 1, a series of conferences, but also working with Westminster Forum. And Vince Cable opened the first one for us. We had a whole series. What I'm going to be just letting you know, it's right at the beginning, but we're going to be rebooting this to Deep Impact 2, focused on energy, carbon, and climate. And you'll see why I say that in a moment. But first, what's Green Street? What's the pilot? What did we do? Well, we wanted to take away the barriers, understand how we could enable people, empower people to adopt a series of technologies, starting with solar and battery, make it easier to move to electric vehicles, and make it easier to move to electric heat or clean heating. There's a natural sequence there, but we wanted to understand and take away the barriers. We've done that successfully in our Sheffield pilot. We've doubled the number of solar and battery installations on our street in our area, pilot area. We did this partly by halving the cost. The way the industry works at the moment is sclerotic and hugely wasteful, and there's lots that can be done about that, even without help from government policy. we wanted to understand the barriers, the psychological ones, and the mindsets and attitudes, and that's been really, really helpful to remove the barriers to adaptable. And it's enabled us to create a new model that is much more applicable to a household in this case, especially in a where we are now, which is in a crisis, in a cost of living crisis. We have to do this in a way that people can adopt and afford. One part of that is about taking the friction away. So we've created a pretty friction-free process, addressing all the key problems, including the misinformation and distrust, by being, in the middle there, and motivated and clearly motivated to provide evidence-based information that people can understand and answer their questions and so on. I'm going to skip quickly because of time. And there are huge limiting factors. Some of them are unacknowledged. People talk about retrofit, and for good reasons, but there's huge demands can be put on people's time that they don't have. And one of the biggest issues is getting to the point of having enough information and enough understanding to confidently make a choice. And it's a big factor. We need to work with household budgets. People don't have capital to place. And households always run on budgets. They're not investors. We have a new model for that. And other factors are the huge, I've already mentioned, waste of money and time in the ecosystem and the installers and so on, all of which I've kind of factored in. Just a couple of shots from this as the local MP who's now supporting, and we're kind of circling out. We have a hubs model based on our previous work on funding hubs, which we hope to use to seed this to every constituency, to towns, cities, neighbourhoods, and so on. It's all part of the Green Streets plan. So what's Deep Impact? What's that about? Deep Impact 2. It says empowering people in local communities. Well, I mentioned earlier on that there's an opportunity, a really huge opportunity to empower lots of different areas. Over 300 of the 407 identifiable local authorities have declared a climate emergency. I didn't realize this until a few days ago. 75% have declared a climate emergency. And those areas want to do positive things. Now, they're cash strapped as well. So that's a barrier, but actually one we can deal with. But there's, within the local authorities, not only, is there a willingness and an openness, but also there's some new things happening. As I said, the facts have changed, the thinking hasn't. We're still on these old assumptions, centralization. I've covered this really already. I won't belabor that. But I will mention some of the key factors. So most people don't know about something called rejected energy. Even experts miss completely the fact that somewhere between a half and 3/4 of energy generated centrally is lost in the chain. So a unit of energy generated from your roof, which you use yourself, is worth up to 3 or 4 times as much as the energy that was generated centrally. That's been lost in the figures because, in a sense, it didn't matter before because it was the only way of doing it. But local energy is better, cheaper, more resilient, more independent. It gets around gridlock. It requires less infrastructure, which is costly, and time consuming, and can support the grid with peak shaving. And the fact that this is effectively digital energy means that we're in a zero marginal cost world, very different. It's digital. You don't have to pay for fuel effectively. And for the last 10 years, the technology is being obeying Moore's law. If you're familiar with that, it means that it gets cheaper and cheaper and better. And battery costs pretty well halved last year, for example. And this is predictable, but tends not to be factored in. And we can factor it in. And the context is the government's devolution by default. So actively encouraging initiative and by mayors and local councils. You know, I'm now in dialogue with the local council here in Sheffield, you know, we'll be building on that. Also things called local area energy plans. There are 97 now teams around the country tasked with creating a local area energy plan. They're mostly being advised by, or almost universally advised by people who think in a centralized manner. And there's things we can do about that, hence talking about, you know, deep impact too. And there's also a funding drought for councils. And again, this can be revenue positive for councils. So deep impact too, we want to build this to inspire and equip those local teams, enable them to think in a new paradigm that is about local and clean energy first, and bring together people, ideas and funding, which we've done quite a lot of before, and also the expertise, tools and resources that they need. That's probably longer than I was originally allocated, but perhaps we used some of Daniel's time. These are a list of things that, you know, we're actively working on and wanting to engage with people around the country locally to create local hubs. One of the great factors that we know about, and this is one of the things I love about MP Watch, is I have a psychology background. People behave better when they're being watched. In fact, they behave better even when they only think they're being watched. And those you know, local councils, not only can we support them, but we can make a big difference. And someone mentioned water earlier on. I've worked for the last 10 years with Barry Shearman, one of the old school MPs, just retired, but still very active, and seeking to get air quality monitoring into every constituency. So these are things that we can kind of help bring together. We're looking for people who've already adopted green technologies that are happy to be, you know, help people understand how that works and how that worked for them. I'll stop talking now.
Thanks, Barry.
And back to you, Rupert.
Yeah, excellent. Really, really interesting presentation. Can you put some one or two key web links for people in the chat for if they want to go and, you know, find out more or get involved, etc. If you could do that, that'd be really helpful. I really obviously was very taken with your point about the profoundly local nature of what you're trying to bring, and it brought to mind for me the way that there's been for so long a default assumption in this country that we need more things like huge nuclear power stations, for example, whereas you seem to be offering part of a very real alternative to that. And I'm delighted to be able to say that we do now have our other speaker on the call. So over to you, Dan Edelstyn. Dan has been involved in the kind of stuff that Barry is doing, and I think part of the way you've been involved, Dan, is by making sure that it gets it becomes visible and is adequately filmed and so on and so forth. But you know far more about it than me, so I'll just hand straight over to you. You can tell us what you have to tell us.
Okay, how long do I have to speak? Like, because I don't want to be boring or like take too
10
long.
minutes, please.
Okay. Okay, cool. So yeah, thanks for inviting me. Sorry for being late, and nice to hear Barry as well, who I've known for like quite a long time now, and has been a backer of Power Station. So and also nice to see Anne Pettifor on the call, who I haven't seen for ages. So it's really nice to see you, Anne. Um, so Power Station, I'll quickly tell you if you've never heard of it. I'll just try and share a screen. I'm not going to do like anything too complicated. Basically, Power Station as a concept is an kind of artwork slash an attempt to take one street and turn it into a renewable power station in London. So in other
Dan, can
words,
you fill more of the screen with the image? Do you have a way of doing that?
I could just yeah. I mean, okay. Hold on a sec. How's that?
Yeah, great.
Okay, if I'm going to do the whole image thing, I'll take you back a tiny bit, but I was just going to say, and it will come to this, that we took a massive inspiration from Anne Pettifor's book, The Case for the Green New Deal, when we were setting up Power Station. She has a chapter in that book called Every Building a Power Station. And her argument was that, we can rapidly scale renewable energy and green technology and do it in a way which provides employment, etc. um, by taking a more Keynesian view of of how we implement our economics, basically. And it was Anne's chapter in that book that really inspired us to try and take it literally and just turn a street into a renewable power station, see if that was possible. And as filmmakers, we wanted to basically chart, our progress in doing that. And I think one of Anne's central arguments was just that, you know, um, in order to achieve a Green Deal, or to rapidly decarbonize, our infrastructure and our households, that we just need to find a way of funding it. And the current economic system doesn't really provide the opportunity to do that at the speed that we need to. So I just wanted to really flag up, that we have a great debt to Anne and her writing going back for ages. Anyway, so this is like, I'm going to rattle through this slideshow because there's nothing more, frustrating than a long slideshow at night, I find. I'm just going to say that like our work, I'm a filmmaker background. My wife and partner Hilary is an artist. And Neela Schluning, who wrote this quote, is a political and art theorist based in America, who wrote a book called Art Politics, Social Anarchist Aesthetics in the Age of Fragmentation. She writes that the making of art is special, consciously constructed kind of social activity. Art can change the world, it can change minds, hearts, perspectives, and it can create new values and new social realities. Only through a deep understanding of how imagery and images affect us can we sort out and then create an alternative, more humane and nourishing reality. So that's the kind of that's the prism, if you like, through which we operate as artists, kind of change makers. We're trying to create something in a kind of microcosmic version which can be rapidly scaled and deployed. So the whole point of Power Station is that it should be replicable, and we set it up as it's a feature documentary which is coming out this year, but it's also been a membership site, and we've shared all the knowledge that we've gathered along the way, for free with absolutely everyone on our mailing list, and we tend to get sort of 100 new email sign-ups every day, so that we're continually building knowledge around, how could we rapidly deploy solar and renewable energy and retrofit at scale? What are the things that are standing in the way, and how can we overcome those obstacles? Basically, those are the kind of questions. The work came out of Bank Job. Again, this movie was about the economic system, and inside the film, we set up a bank, we printed our own money, and we blew up 1.2 million pounds worth of high interest debt. A little bit like we were really completely in debt again to Anne, because she'd already like blown up £1 billion or dollars worth of dollars in the early 2000s with her Drop the Debt campaign. Was it kind of like that, a bit like that, but also twisted in with some of the American anti-debt movement, like Occupy Wall Street and Strike Debt, etc. But like what we learned from Bank Job and from understanding how the economic system works and how debt and inequality is encoded into our money system, we began to think, well, what's next? And it was kind of like we'd finished that film and project, and it was lockdown. We were stuck on our street, so we started to say to ourselves, well, what can we do from this situation we're now in? So we began to think, well, let's try and take Anne's other idea and see if we can implement it, and turn the street into a renewable power station. And we took a little bit of again inspiration from David Graeber, who wrote that protest is like begging the powers that be to dig a well, whereas direct action is digging the well and daring them to stop you. And so we walked up and down the street, knocking on doors and asking everyone on the street 3 questions. One was, would you like to have either free or heavily subsidized solar? 2 is, are you worried about the cost of living and the climate crisis? And 3 is, would you, and that was on film, I should say, because we were interviewing people. And then number 3 was, would you put up a power station sign in your window? And so they could argue they could answer yes or no to any of those 3 questions. So these different colors here represented what people had answered. If they were blue, it just meant that they weren't up for anything. They wouldn't be in the film. They wouldn't put a power station sign up, and they didn't want solar. So we made that blue because it was kind of sad for us, whereas these colors were more like bright and happy. That's like, we'll be in the film, we'd like solar, and we'll put up a sign. And the sign was that, and it went in people's windows. And in fact, there's still loads of them in the windows up and down the street. Whoops, sorry. And in the process, we got to know everyone on the street that we hadn't really known before. And we learned loads about, how people were thinking, how they were feeling. It was a cost of living crisis. And, we're obviously living in a climate crisis, and we wanted to know what they would do, if they were the government, etc. We printed our own money again. This time we called it the greenbacks instead of the money that we created before. And the concept behind this was, if people buy it, we'll use the proceeds to help fund the solar street. And we took lots of photographs. We launched it. Lots of people holding the sign. Then it didn't really work very well, so we had to sleep for 23 nights on our roof to raise more money, which was kind of bed knobs and broomsticks and Mary Poppins. And then we got onto the front of the Observer magazine after we'd raised 100 grand, so it didn't actually help, but it was very good, to try and get the story and the message out there. And then we've been sponsoring other small grassroots action on the street in kind of like the manner of kind of cooperatives. This is just more on the project. And so that's kind of like where that's at. And then I'm not going to read that final quote, but I'd say basically with the power station project now, we're at a point where we've turned it all into a film. Of course, as we're obscure artists, the powers that be will not put that onto mainstream television. So we have to build a robust distribution strategy ourselves, mainly using Instagram, Facebook, etc., and getting lots and lots of people onto our mailing list and then going direct. But we're collaborating with crowdfunder.co.uk and Octopus and because they did the installation, and then a lot of other organizations to try and get this film out there to millions of people. We are also in talks with Channel 4, but then, Channel 4 didn't show the film where we blew up £1 million of debt, but has just shown a Michael Sheen film where he abolished debt. So you have to already be famous to get onto television, and it's very hard to get ideas if you're seen as a radical onto mainstream television, because one of our exec producers is head of culture at Nesta, and they're trying to actively encourage TV to try and bring home the importance of like decarbonizing our housing stock and our infrastructure. But you know, as far as most of those broadcasters will go is about mentioning that so and so has just got a heat pump, and that's about as far as it will go. So I mean, I'm a bit possibly a bit cynical about our media and broadcasting systems. So you know, trying always to take matters into our own hands and find our own methods of distribution. Um, but yeah, so we now I have another like slideshow which is all about like our impact distribution strategy for the film, but also a bit like Barry, you know, we have another 50 streets who would like to become power stations. Again, like one of the big problems that they all face is access to finance to do it. And you know, so we're trying to kind of figure out how to overcome a lot of those problems. But really, the key way that we can overcome the problem is by having a government that actually wants to put people in front, you know, people and you know the future above profit, you know, and that's just not really happening. I mean, we've still got a Labour government that is supporting all sorts of oil and gas drilling and has, you know, is putting, you know, spending billions on the military above just solving some of these big crises which have been plaguing us for generations. So, you know, I don't think there's really that many innovative technological ways that we can overcome the basic problem of you know having a government which just won't deal with the big problems that we have, you know. So that's how I feel about it. So maybe a bit less positive than the ending of Barry's thing, but we always remain committed to taking action. And you know the company name is Optimistic Productions, so we will remain optimistic. And that's it. Hopefully that wasn't too long. I don't know how long that was, but hopefully
That was great. That was great, Dan. That was virtually on time. It was really, really interesting. I'm just putting a quick link in the chat to your film project, as I'm aware of it. But it would be great if you wanted to dump some links in the chat, including to what you've got on YouTube or Instagram, perhaps. Because, you know, I think what you've been talking about, we'll soon be discussing it among the whole team here, everyone who's here tonight. But what you've been talking about is clearly, like what Barry's been talking about, aligned with what Safer is trying to do and with what the Climate Majority Project is trying to do. And certainly if we can help spread the word about some of what you're
well, yeah, I think
bring, that would be great.
well we're having an impact strategy meeting this Thursday, actually tomorrow, you know, with like a lot of quite big organizations, and I do think they did try and invite you to it. I don't know if you saw an invitation.
Oh gosh, I don't think I did. Maybe if it's not too late, maybe something can be forwarded separately. Okay.
Yeah,
Right,
I'll try
okay.
tomorrow.
Jen Newell has just said in the chat that yes, sorry, yes, I'm aware of what you're talking about. Jen is representing us there. Yeah,
Oh,
apologies.
okay, cool.
Jen
Yeah,
Newell. Yeah,
I've not been that much connected to setting that whole thing up, but I do know that we were hoping that you guys would come in because we certainly do want to, you know, our goal is to get this film seen by 1 million people,
yeah,
and that's part of our kind of impact strategy. So yeah, so we're really up for it. And you know, and basically the way it works for us is when people join our membership site, they get to see a workshop with two different kind of workshops. One is how to get solar panels on your beleaguered school. I think that's the title, so that they can free up money to actually allow the teachers to teach and not pay it all to the energy companies. That might be the subtitle. It might not be. I'm just making it up. And then the other one is how to do the street by street method, such as it is, with its
yeah,
flaws and everything, because you know it's
yeah,
very difficult to get like all your neighbors' solar panels. I can tell you, having tried it for a couple of years, because some of them are renting, some of them are dying, some of them are, you know, having a divorce, etc. There's that. Then there's like many just cannot afford it. They can't even afford to pay 50% of it, you know,
yeah,
and so
yes.
the
So
way that
yes,
the
in
real
terms
way.
of yeah, I was just going to say in
Sorry, yeah,
terms of
go on.
the so in terms of the Jen Newell, who's one of our organisers, will be there representing us at this thing that's about to happen. In terms of the big agenda that you're raising of like political change. That is clearly part of the raison d'etre of MP Watch. And it's also very much in the background, the raison d'etre of the Climate Majority Project, in the sense of what we want to achieve is having enough people who are active citizens, etc., in relation to climate, that parties such as the Labour Party can't get away with acting the way they're acting at the moment. That's one way of understanding what the ambition of the Climate Majority Project is. And now I think we'd better go to Anne, who has been heavily trailed by Barry and Dan, which is great. Most of you will be aware of Anne already. I'm just going to mention one thing that many of you may not be aware of, which is her incredible book, The Coming First World Debt Crisis, which was published in 2006, where she basically anticipated what started 2 years later with the world financial crisis. And I don't think she's had enough credit for that. I was one of the people, Anne, who was lucky enough to read your book before the world financial crisis. And so as it started to unfold, was like, oh yeah, I kind of thought this might be coming. So it's fantastic to have you here, Anne. Anne is here in the role really of a discussant. She's going to be responding to one or two of the things that Barry and Dan have said, and maybe also broadening our agenda a little bit before we move after that straight into Q&A. So Anne, over to you.
Thank you very much, Rupert. And I have 10 minutes as well, I'm assuming.
Yes, please, maximum.
So thank you so much for including me. And I'm just bowled over by both Barry and Dan. They're both heroes of mine. And I'm feeling bad because I'm sitting at my desk using words and they're actually down there on the ground doing stuff. And it's so inspiring what they're doing. And so I'm just grateful to them for giving us all that optimism and hope. And I know how tough it is. I could see it on the lines on Barry's face, and I can see it on the lines on Dan's face. It's hard work, and they are just keeping at it. And I wanted to begin with a quote from Ursula Le Guin, where she wrote, "We live in capitalism. Its power seems inescapable, but then so did the divine right of kings. Any human power can be resisted and changed by human beings. Resistance and change often begin in art, and very often in our art, which is the art of words." And for me, words are my way of trying to bring about a transformation. And I'm not doing it actively at local level. I'm doing it, I suppose, more internationally. But I really do want to see that change. And what inspires me is the experience I had with Jubilee 2000. So back in the 1990s, early in the 1990s, we thought of launching a campaign to cancel the debts of the poorest countries because they'd become totally unsustainable. The international financial system was completely broken and was causing these enormous problems of debt. But this was the height of Thatcher's popularity and of the concept that, you know, people were tired of international development, basically. And nobody thought it was possible to do that. So what was amazing to me was that we began with education. We began with just explaining to people. And I have to say, the churches provided enormous constituencies for this education, and both on the evangelical and all the faiths participated and gave us, if you like, an enormous base. And that base is still there. And the possibility of an ecumenical movement, bringing together people of faith who, you know, are more likely to want to make sacrifices for change than I think others are. That was an enormous base to start with. But then we brought in the trade unions and the medical profession and so on and so forth. And what was inspiring to me was that we just simply prepared briefings on the workings of the international financial system and the relationships between sovereign debtors on the one hand and their official international creditors on the other, and the nature of those negotiations. And when we started, I'll never forget, you know, an interview with these big shots at Oxfam who said, you can't possibly do this. You know, it's much too complicated. This is for people, you know, experts. You know, this is not for the public. And I said, I just do not agree. Number one, the public are not stupid. number two, the public just have to be informed, you know. And I think for me, the most inspiring moment of the campaign was when a Treasury official came up to me and said, God, what the fuck is going on? He said, we've had to employ more people in the Treasury to deal with this issue. Gordon Brown was Chancellor at the time. And we're overwhelmed by these letters we're getting, handwritten letters. He said, you know, we're getting letters from women on pink pieces of paper with little bunches of flowers in the corner saying, dear sir, I understand that when you came to negotiate Uganda's debt, you chose as the cutoff date for your negotiations 1983, blah, blah, blah. And we think this is, he said, who told them about 1983 and Uganda's cutoff date? And I said, we told them. It's not rocket science, not complicated. And they get it. And once they've got it, once that woman sat down at her kitchen table and wrote that letter, she was empowered. She'd understood something and she knew it could be changed. It had to be changed. And we got, as I think Barry or Dan mentioned, $100 billion of debt owed by the poorest countries written off by 2000, 2005. And I'm really proud of that. But I recognize that it began as a bottom-up movement and as people understanding and having things explained to them in ways which was made it accessible and empowering, and then acted on it. And they did it spontaneously. We didn't have the money to organize people. They had to organize themselves, and they did. To our astonishment, something like 100,000 people turned up at the G8 summit in Birmingham in 1998. Totally unexpected. We didn't know they would come. We hadn't really been able to organize them. They came spontaneously. And the police and the leadership the political leadership were stunned by that. And I say all this because right now, I live in Suffolk, and we're in the middle of the most extraordinary destruction of the Suffolk countryside by, number one, a huge nuclear power installation in Sizewell C, and number two, by the onshoring of all the infrastructure related to wind energy companies operating offshore. And it's resulting in my small town, Saxmundham, will have 3 enormous converter stations overlooking the town and occupying a whole farmer's field. The farmer's profoundly against, he doesn't want to sell his land for this purpose. And then there's going to be a substation in the village nearby. And it's going to be devastating. And at the moment, if you were to travel to Sizewell, please don't. It's agony to drive there. They've stripped out hedges from Woodbridge all the way past Saxmundham. There are huge swathes of land that have been cleared for dumping sand and stone and for parking trucks and so on. And then hedges and trees have been stripped to enable roads to be widened for huge trucks to come in and dump all the stuff at Sizewell. It's just appalling to live through. But what it's doing is raising awareness amongst the local people of the impact of this infrastructure. But the really saddest thing is that people don't understand what it's about. People don't understand why. What is AC to DC? What is, what is a converter station? Why is it the size of a warehouse? Why doesn't it employ anybody once it's running? Why is it just like a warehouse and with no employment? Why is this jobless industrialization of the countryside, and why is it happening all at once? And of course, it's all been pushed through by the National Grid, a private company, a globalized private company owned by, I don't know, United Arab Emirates and so on. And so really the task of educating and of explaining to people, once people understand, there's very little else one has to do, but it's that understanding that is required in the first instance that empowers them to act. So this is where I am at the moment, while at the same time I'm trying to understand how we can transform the financial system to make it more stable. I think I'm going over time here. Am I over time yet?
You've got a couple of minutes left.
So for me, the really important thing to understand is that the financial system fuels the carbon system. There's no possibility of exploring extracting carbon without finance. Finance is, you know, the original spigot, the tap, which is switched on, which then enables the expansion of oil and gas exploration and so on. And right now, while Donald Trump is trying to degrade and break down the global trading system, he's doing nothing to interfere with the international financial system and the nature of it. And again, you know, I go back to the Jubilee 2000 experience when we started talking about this international system. We were told we couldn't possibly explain it to the public. I am on a mission to write, and I'm writing a book at the moment in which I'm trying to explain how this happens in ways that will make it comprehensible to people, because economists and financiers like to talk in a kind of geeky way, in a way which obscures, and number one, obscures what they are saying, and number two, takes what they argue as given and natural and unchangeable. And I want to show that it's entirely changeable. So that's where I'm at. And in the meantime, I'm just so proud to be able to be watching Dan and Barry with their real on the ground work that they're doing. And you too, Rupert, which I think the work you're doing with Caroline and with all the people on this call is truly inspiring, but also so sound, because it is about reaching people where they are. And that's the only way you'll get change. So thank you.
And thank you so much for those very kind words for all of us. And it's really, it's very excellent to have you on this call. We really, really appreciate it. Folks, you've got an opportunity now for the next 25 minutes or so to talk about any of these things. We welcome comments as well as questions. We especially welcome questions that are asked with your own voices. So if you're going to do that, please be ready to unmute. We can have questions, obviously, to any of Barry, Dan, or Anne, and to any aspect of the topic. So who would like to start off by asking a question? So I see a question here from Jessica. Jessica, do you want to unmute and ask that?
Yes, so I guess it's partly for Anne, but maybe the others will have a view as well. So when back in the day, I think it was with the Conservative Lib Dem coalition, there was finance available in Brighton. They managed to get a kind of pot of money, and they were offering people, I believe, in social housing, but it might have been poorer folk. They were offering them a way of getting solar panels without any financial without noticeable financial loss. So what happened was there was a sort of, the solar panels were put up and the householder continued to pay their energy bills at the same rate as when the solar panels were put up, but obviously the energy was cheaper. So over time, the difference paid back the original loan to the people rolling out the scheme, and it dealt with both you know, energy and fuel poverty, and it was beautiful. But then the Conservatives pulled the rug out of the financial model. I mean, would something like that be possible now, do you think?
Who will go first on that? Barry?
I'm happy to comment. There are quite a number of subscription-based models now, and there's more on the way, where a company will you know, pay for the installation, put the panels on the roof, install a battery, which is a big part of it these days, and basically charge you something in the region of what you're paying for your energy. My view on those is that they can work well for some people. I think they're a little greedy, the ones I've seen so far. So the companies who are doing them seem to be making quite a big chunk out of it. But as I mentioned before, we're on a decreasing curve in terms of the true costs of the panels themselves, the electronics, and so on. Not so much the labour, but those will become more relevant, partly because of competition, but also because of those factors. And one of the things that we want to do is kind of signpost the good guys.
Yeah, I think this was a not-for-profit, but it seems like a similar model's been taken over by the private sector from what you've said.
Yeah, I don't expect really to see that from government at all. Certainly not the previous one or a repeat of that, or if such a thing were even, you could even think of it. But and almost certainly not this one, unfortunately.
It's such a shame, isn't it? Because you can imagine that there would be a kind of knock-on effect that once some people had it, and it's like, oh, my friend down the road, her energy is a quarter of mine, and heat pumps and stuff as well. And then people would be like, oh, I want a bit like gas when I was young. Everybody, when the switchover happened, it happened in a sort of osmosis, social osmosis way that you change people's minds by modeling it, but we don't have these good models. Anyway, I'll shut up now.
We're going to try and foster that, but if I just add one more thing, please, which is, I didn't get into the details of it, but our model is to upfront look at the impact on the bill, but also the export, because you can reliably get decent money for exporting, particularly during peak periods. And we're going to be able to add other incomes, so that we want to get to the point where we can say, look, here's a way you can get there. You can get it yourself, and actually be better off in year one, and then more so in year 2 and 3 and subsequently.
Very good, thank you. Can I point out there's some great stuff going on in the Zoom chat, and especially to draw attention to Derek's comment, which I think is relevant to this question that we've just had. But let's move on now in our Q&A to Chris and then Julia. Chris, please unmute and then go ahead.
Thank you very much. It's very interesting to hear from all the speakers tonight. Thank you. It did make me think from the position of an energy company, whether or not they are engaged with you about this, because it's in their interest to sell you electricity. So if we have small communities that are coming not off grid as such, but requiring less of their centralized production of energy, then those companies are going to lose money. So there'll come a point where they won't want that to happen anymore, unless they are also going to invest in this idea that everybody is a power station. So I just wondered if I could hear your thoughts, Barry and Daniel, about that, and whether or not you've engaged directly with them about what their plans are for that.
I could talk quickly on that if you like. There's a film called We the Power, which you can watch, I think, for free on YouTube. I think it was paid for by Patagonia, and they talk about that, how that pans out across Europe, and how there's been a kind of an attempt to shut down, cooperatively owned energy, particularly I think in Germany, where they talked about like a kind of negative spiral taking place, where more and more communities were really adopting community owned solar. And so what you're imagining is definitely something that's that's happened. And we're now working with a company called 10, whose kind of whole modus operandi is to try and democratize ownership of solar, etc., and retrofit to give 0% finance or very low in order to chip away at the power of centralized energy companies. So I think you're definitely right to kind of hit on that. I mean, we're also slightly working with Octopus because when we did our install on 16 houses on the street, that was who we ended up working with, because we had to find another supplier. We were working with a small installer, but then they doubled their prices after we'd raised the money. So we needed to find, and then Octopus were just starting to install, and they recognized it as a good PR opportunity, I think. So, I do think that in order to achieve the sort of decarbonisation of the country, that it can't just be the preserve of kind of like left-wing thinkers and artists and activists. It's going to involve, people, like us, like fermenting the ideas and innovating, etc. But you also need to have, like local government, central government. I think you need to have big businesses, small businesses. Like we should maybe try and get away from this concept, like this like oppositional kind of concept that we're all kind of, oh my God, my way's the best way and all the rest of it, and actually try and figure it out. And and I've kind of up to a point, I'm not in any way involved in any big businesses or anything, but up to a point we get the sense from some of these businesses that they really do, that we're all pulling in the same direction. After all, we all have children, many of us as we get older will hope to have grandchildren, etc. So, we're all united in our desire, across all these different sectors, etc., to actually, it's in all of our interests to protect our actual world. So my sense is that we need to try and figure it out. But yes, I do think that there are vested interests, and if there weren't, we would have moved away from fossil fuels years ago, right? If there weren't those vested interests. So
yeah, I can tell you a couple of hard facts. It's really interesting to listen to Greg Jackson, the innovator behind Octopus, talk about this, because he's been asked about this in public, and he is an example of someone who knows and will say publicly that this is an inevitable switch. It's going to happen, and we have to adapt our business models, and he's at the forefront of that. The other thing I would say is he's right, it is inevitable on a global basis, just on the pure economics of the thing. And one of the reasons why we were, BP and others have been and are hedging their bets with offshore wind farms, onshore wind farms, any kind of farm, is because that preserves their business model. It's a centralization thing that actually isn't necessary, and it's one of the reasons why, having looked at this in great detail, I think our regions, our cities, our towns, can own this for ourselves, and it's hugely to our advantage rather than continue to be taxed, basically.
Barry and Dan, thank you for those great answers. I just want to comment, as I noted in the Zoom chat, that I don't know if you realized, Dan, but what you said about reaching outside the bubble and how really this is everybody's issue and so forth, and we mustn't be politically polarized over it. This is exactly the program of the Climate Majority Project. So I think we're all very deeply aligned here tonight, which is great. We next have a question from Julia. Julia, please unmute and go ahead and ask.
Thank you. It's really when you're looking into this space at the moment, it was at the area of protest, which in fact this is, has been taken over by people of power and of wealth, and deregulation, which is something that normally is asked for by people who are impacted by negativity of these things. Do you think or the deregulation that is being pushed through will go so far as to actually help smaller actors to enable them to provide better environmental protection, be able to cut through all the red tape that currently prevents community action being enabled to sort of control your little bit of the grid?
Yeah. Thanks, Julia.
Basically.
It's such an interesting question. As I understand it, what you're asking is, most of us are probably assuming that that what Trump and his party are doing in the States is disastrous, and of course, in many ways, it is. But what I understand you to be asking is there a potential upside in that this deregulatory agenda may enable small actors to bring about environmental protection locally in the kind of way that Barry is talking about? So let's go to Barry, but perhaps first let's go to Anne on this, because Anne, of course, has the big picture view of the economics here. What would you say about this, Anne, in response to Julia's question?
I would say that actually what deregulation that's being practiced at the moment by Elon Musk and others in America is anti-democratic. And regulation is always something that comes up from the bottom, if you like. It's a democratic process. So, for example, right now, everybody's terribly worried about AI. AI is this technology which is in control of the Silicon Valley crowd. It's very powerful, obviously, and it's going to impact on all of our lives. And what we're seeing bubbling up from below are 1,000 artists, film stars and all kinds of people who came together only last week to say, hang on, you're not going to steal our content, you're not going to steal our work and put it into your mill called AI, artificial intelligence, and make a profit from it. Sorry, but you can't do that. And what was striking to me was that that's a bottom-up movement. You know, it comes from below, and extraordinarily, they persuaded every single newspaper in the country to put a cover on their front page saying it must be fair, right? And nobody's ever managed to get the Daily Mail and the Guardian and all of the papers all to argue in the same way. And so what you see happening there is they're beginning to say this powerful thing called AI must be regulated, and it mustn't hurt people like us. It must be managed properly. And so in that sense, regulation is always, you know, for example, traffic regulation, let's make cars safer, let's make traveling safer. That came from people on the ground, ordinary people saying, hang on, these cars are killing us. We want safety belts. You know, I remember my father refusing to wear a safety belt because he thought it was totally unnecessary in those days. Whereas, you know, what everybody now knows that you've got to have that kind of regulation to be safe. So I worry about what the Trump administration is doing for deregulation, because that's going to hurt so many, you know, ordinary people on the ground. It's like taking away, it would be like, for example, air traffic control. One of the things they're saying is let's deregulate air traffic control. Well, that might be fine for the experts, but if you're a passenger on a plane landing at a New York airport, you're probably now going to be very nervous about the removal of regulation around air traffic. So do you see what I'm saying? I'm saying that it's not, in my view, thing that will be good for ordinary people on the ground.
And thank you. That was very clear. I wonder, Barry, do you share Anne's view, or is there some disagreement on the call, which is always something that can be vibrant on a webinar? What do you say, Barry?
I'll try. Okay. No, I do have a slightly different perspective, and that is, you know, I agree that the kind of deregulation that Donald Trump and his ilk want is basically get out of our way. We want to make more money, and we don't really care about the consequences. And that's really not good. But I would say that the word regulation, most people, including most politicians, think of it as a kind of magic wand. You get a bit more and things get better. And the kind of regulation that we have, which is compliance based, just turns everything into an arms race. So I've been arguing for more than 10 years now, somewhat successfully in some areas, for smart regulation that actually works, and actually for pushing more of the things that you're trying to regulate back into the legal system, where it's principles based and fairness based, not hugely complicated stuff that most people can't even begin to understand, and done in back rooms by regulators who are on a revolving door with the industry. There's all those problems, but people talk about this as a binary thing, and it isn't a binary thing.
And I just want to say to Julia that she's right, that, you know, a lot of red tape put in there by the bureaucracy to block progress, really. But I think what I'm just saying is that what's happening in the US at the moment is a very different thing. And I agree with Barry that there's an awful lot of red tape that's designed to entangle us deeper and further and prevent us from being more innovative. But on the whole, you know, this contempt for regulation comes from the impression that actually, no, we don't need anyone to tell us what to do. We want to just do what we like. Really. And that's what's got us into this mess. That's what's got us into the carbon mess, for example.
Jessica, we'll come back to you as you're the co-host of a call. We'll give you the unusual privilege of a second bite at the cherry as we move towards the end of our call. So if anyone's got a question, do ask it soon or you'll be out of time. Jessica?
Yes, I was very happy to go after anybody else who's
You go quickly now, and then we'll have Jen, and then that'll probably be it.
So, what are the implications for community resilience? So, say I live in Hastings, in St Leonard's, at a very peak time of the year. We're a bit of a holiday area. The water system went down in St Leonard's, absolutely kind of devastated the local economy. But as we go forward and our systems get more creaky, what's the advantage of having, I mean, it seems obvious that it's good to have your energy in your local area, but can it work independently of the national system? And is there a way of kind of making a network where you could give, you know, in some kind of emergency scenario, you could share surplus energy with other people, like local schools or, you know, a local church hall, or what are the ideas around that?
Shall I take that?
Yeah, and just keep it quick, please, Barry, because we're getting close to the end.
Potentially, absolutely, yes. Currently, interestingly, there's a thicket of regulations that were made for an earlier age. There's a bill that is poised to change that in Parliament that would actually modernize that and enable things like microgrids. All the technologies exist, so it's all possible, but it's blocked at the moment because you know, the current rules and regulations favor the incumbents, and they'd rather it wasn't changed.
Brilliant. Right, final question. This is from Jen Newell, who has asked me to read it because she's unable to speak on the call tonight. So it's in the chat there if you want to look at it. And it goes like this. Having taken conversations around community energy, I've noticed the other benefit is it organically leads to conversations around demand and how we consider need, which is also really important in the context of what Nate Hagens describes so well as every novel energy has been additive, not a transition. I'm curious to hear your experiences of this side of the conversation coming up. Anyone want to take that on? Anne?
Well, we had a public meeting last Sunday with our local people, and the Member of Parliament came along, and there was all the talk about we've got to expand, we're going to have the demand for energy is going to double, we've got to have more and more clean energy. And I asked the question, why don't we talk about lowering demand? Why don't we talk about how do we lower our use of energy? Why do, you know, become more self-sufficient and so on? And to my astonishment, the audience was incredibly responsive to that. And I think what people were crying out for was, how do I lower my demand for energy? You know, how do I move around without burning, without using a car and burning petrol and so on? How do I, you know, how do I cook in a way which lowers demand for energy? How do I keep my house warm? I think we need advice and we need guidance on this, and nobody's talking about it. We're talking about, you know, if you like, exponentially expanding energy supply without ever talking enough about demand, and maybe even rationing demand. I mean, that isn't even a matter for discussion at the moment, and I think it's incredibly important. You know, why can't we be told, sorry, you can't have your central heating on for 18 hours a day, but you may be able to have it on for, I don't know, 6 or 8 hours a day. I don't know, but you know, we've got to start talking about lowering demand and setting limits. Now, Of course, politicians won't do that because they don't think it's popular. But I think there is the response from the public on Sunday was, please tell us, help us, we'd like to do this.
Brilliant. That is a great note on which to end, because that opens up into some bigger themes, which we hope to return to on future calls. This has been a fabulous call. It will be made available on video. Please look out for that and do share it if you've enjoyed it as much as many of us have. The Zoom chat's been really, really strong, as so often. If you want to save that, go to the 3 little dots at the top and press Save Chat. We will be ending this webinar now. Do look out for future webinars in the series. Big thanks to MP Watch for co-hosting. Huge thanks to our remarkable panel of speakers, really diverse, but really kind of coinciding on the topic, Dan and Barry and Anne. Do feel free, folks, if you wish now, everybody to unmute and applaud or say goodnight or whatever. But we are now at an end for this webinar. I've been Rupert Reed. You've been great. And thanks so much. We hope to see you all again. And let's all do what we can on this absolutely vital set of issues, which are going to be certainly absorbing our interest in the Safer campaign, and which I think really highlighted some of the things that in the Climate Majority Project we've been already trying to do, and we'll hopefully go a lot further with in future. Thanks so much, everybody, and good night.
Good
Thanks, everyone.
night.
Thank you. Good
Good
night.
night.